At the close of the last session, I talked about how the parent is a fueler and the teenager is a drainer. More like the teenager is the car that goes to the petrol station, and the parent is the gas station fueling the teenager. And the gas station does need to have sufficient fuel all the time. Otherwise, when the teenager comes there to fuel, the parent is drained of fuel and is unable to fuel. So what does happen when the parent is drained and the fuel supply line is from parent to teenager is not supplying that fuel, emotional fuel, properly? The teenager, who still needs to be fueled, will immediately turn to their peers. And at the close of the last session, I said that peer fuel is always dirty fuel. Now, you cannot stop your teenager from turning to their peers, but you can train yourself to keep your fueling line completely open, so that even as a teenager fuels from his peers, they are continuing to fuel from you, and you can get a chance to recognize some of the dirty fuel that is coming out to your teenager from his peers. So what must we do? Remember our first passage this morning from 1 John that talked about how the parent ought to know the Lord, how the parent needs to keep their fueling line with God open. Let me encourage you, parents, to keep that fuel line completely open, so you and God are in fellowship, and you have your emotional tank fueled by God, so that you can continue fueling your teenager from a full tank. But let me also suggest to you that you need to introduce your teenager to God. Now, hopefully this already happened when they were young, and you want to promote your teenager getting their emotional tank filled from spending time with the Lord. So now this teenager has two sources of fuel, really three. There is you, the parent. There is God. The teenager is getting clean fuel from those two sources. The fueling from the peers will always be there. And if these teens the peers are connected to God, it will not always be dirty fuel, but I think it is safe to assume that peer fuel is always dirty fuel. Now, as you look at the diagram on your screen, you'll realize that I've introduced two additional components to the diagram. I've got the two orange, what I'm calling peer parents, drawn at the same level as the parent. I want to encourage you, parents, to have parent peers who help you to process what you're going through with your teenager. Let me suggest to you that if you are committed to learning from these videos, that you draw in the parents of the friends of your teenager, so that you can learn together, so that you've got these parent peers who are processing information with you, but who are hopefully also connected to God. You can see that in your diagram, that these parent peers are also connected to God. So you are not meeting together just to discuss and talk about how horrible it is to raise teenagers and what challenging times you go through. But in your meeting together, you're also encouraging one another in how it is possible to navigate these murky waters of raising teenagers. So parents need peers who are godly to help them go through this process. But if you look below the parent, the fueler parent, you'll see another purple component I've added to that diagram, and I've called this mentor. Now listen carefully. There are things that you are telling your 14-year-old that he's not paying attention to. Well, at least it appears that way. Actually, they are paying attention, but they seem distracted, and you think they are not paying attention. Find someone within your circle of relationships who is 19 or 20-year-old. Now, the gap in age between a 14-year-old and a 19 or 20-year-old is not that huge, but the gap in education is big. In the Kenyan school system, the 14-year-old is just completing their primary school, and the 19-year-old is already in the university. So the academic gap is huge, but the age gap is not that big. Your 14-year-old will very easily look up to the 19-year-old because they admire their academic achievements. Now, parents, if you have a person like that, of good moral character, take full advantage of this person. Let them be available to your teenager. I'm stressing good moral character because if they are not, then you're setting up your teenager for failure. But a good moral character can be a mentor to your teenager, can give input to this teenager, hopefully a person of the same gender. But for this to be effective, this person also needs to be hooked up into God. So you have the mentor being fueled by God. You have this mentor occasionally fueling your teenager. You have you as the parent who's receiving emotional fuel from peer parents also fueling your teenager. You have your teenager fueling directly from God. So your teenager will always want to be fueled by their peers. You cannot stop that, but there is something you can do. And as you look at the last of these diagrams, pay special attention to the dotted red line. The dotted red line starts off from the fueling parent and goes around their teenager, goes around the peers who are fueling this teenager, and goes upwards to God. And the point I'm trying to bring here is that you should know the friends of your teenager. Because these are the people who hang out with your son or daughter. These are the people who have the potential influence or negative influence on your son or daughter. So what you really want to do is to draw this group close to yourself. Let them hang out at your house. You be the one fueling not only your son or daughter, but also fueling that whole group and connecting them to God. As I mentioned earlier, we have a training session which we call Peers Without Pressure. And the essence of that training session is to show you how you can disciple your own children in the context of their peers, how to connect those peers to God, resulting in peers without pressure. So it is possible to raise your teenagers and not be frustrated by it. It is possible for your teenagers to have peers and friends they hang out with and not necessarily be influenced negatively by these peers or teenagers. Now, there are times where the teenager, instead of being the drainer, becomes the fueler. When that happens, trouble is coming. What are some reasons why a teenager may become a fueler? Perhaps they have gone through a painful experience. Perhaps they have lost a parent. Perhaps there's a divorce that has happened within the home, and maybe the teenager is spending time with the mom, and mom is just venting the pain that she has gone through because of loss of her husband or loss of the relationship, and they are venting on the teenager, and in fact the teenager now becomes the fueler of the mother who's draining them. Or perhaps it is the father who's draining this teenager. And some other reasons why this happens, parents die, and suddenly the 17-year-old has to take care of younger siblings. They become the fueler as the siblings become the drainer. Or perhaps there is an intense dating relationship, and the teens are fueling and draining each other. Or perhaps there is early marriage. There are many reasons why a teenager can become a fueler. It is not a desirable thing, but it does happen. But as parents, you must remember that you are the fueler and your teenager is a drainer, and that's how it's supposed to be. You know, little children can be fueled very easily by hugs and kisses, but it takes a lot more than that to fuel a teenager.